Critical Role's Campaign 4 is going to be a West Marches campaign. What does that mean? How's Brennan supposed to handle 13 players? Why would he do this? Should I try with my home game? Alright, let's start from the beginning. The West Marches was originally the name of the campaign run by Ben Robbins. You see, back in 2001, Ben had a problem common to many game masters. Too many players, too many schedules, and no way to run a regular campaign with everyone at the table. However, Ben had an interesting idea. What if the players were the ones motivating the quests instead of just being strangers in a tavern waiting to be told what to do? What if you didn't need the same group playing every session? How could a game be organized to accommodate the needs of the many, not just those who are available every Friday night at 5? What emerged was a unique sandbox experience. The titular West Marches were a frontier region, out on the outskirts of civilization near a fortified town. The player characters were the whole of the adventuring profession in town, which meant that when they heard about a temple full of gold being guarded by bugbears, it was up to them to decide who was going to go and when. This means that the players organized the sessions themselves. Then they would let Ben know, and he could run a session for just those 4 to 5 players who are going to go out there, and not the 14, 15 players that he had in total. Upon the return of the adventurers, they would tell everyone what had happened and map out their path to this temple. Perhaps on this adventure they find a riddle or a passage that means nothing to them, but when they tell it to another player, they recognize it as part of their own questline that they've been working on. That in turn would get them to organize the next group of adventurers to go out and do the next step of that quest, and so on and so forth. This makes the game a massive sandbox environment that feels organically explored and lived in, and less of a singular plot. The draw here is the cooperative exploration of the region, working together with fellow adventurers and using their strengths. If you know you're going through the Ghost Woods, you're going to want to bring a paladin or a cleric along to fight all those undead. If you have to negotiate with an orc chieftain to get safe passage, well, you want to bring along an orc, or at least someone who speaks orcish. On the player side of things, this also means you can play as much as you want. If you have time for a weekly game, get a group together every week. Or, if you only have time once a month, you can play every month. Experience game probably won't be even across all these characters, but that can actually work to your advantage, creating an in-game economy. A level 12 adventurer might not have the time or simple inclination to go deal with a bunch of goblins, and so they can post a reward for other lower level adventurers. Maybe part of the reward is a +1 battle axe that they found on another quest of their own. One of the core tenets of this style of gameplay is that the central hub, be that a town, a fortified base, a secret hideout, there is no intrigue or adventure to be found there. Everything requires exploration outside of the city. All of the interest and drama is generated by the player characters and their interactions with each other. This creates an incentive to engage more with other player characters and their plotlines. Now, I'm sure you can imagine a ton of variants depending on the game's system and setting, but this was the core adventure. The original. I'm sure this sounds very cool to our players and absolutely terrifying to our game masters. That's a lot of work, and that's actually by design. Ben used the player-driven scheduling to force himself to finish adventures rather than getting stuck in that common procrastination perfection loop that so many of us are so familiar with. If the characters are going to the Elder Ruins on Friday, well, you better have an adventure by then. That said, how do you even begin to prepare something like this as a game master? Well, I have some general tips in my running an open world campaign video, but let's get a little more specific here. These are some steps to get started running games in the original flavor, but afterwards I'll include some variants to impart some of that West Marches flavor into other games. Now, to get started, you're going to need a map. But not any map. A secret map. This secret map should never be shown to the players. The players are going to be in charge of mapping out their own quests and landmarks and don't know what's exactly going to be out there. For this purpose, I'm a big fan of hex maps, especially as they were used in Tomb of Annihilation. There's tons of websites out there that can help you make a simple keyed map. And of course, each hex covers the same amount of distance depending on the system that you choose. For something like D&D 5th edition, I'd go with a half day's travel. It's going to make the math a lot easier when you're dealing with difficult terrain or other changes. That comes out to 12 miles end to end. From here, you can start to build out the geography and landmarks on your secret map. Is there a huge forest to the northeast or a desert to the west? There might be other small towns, but your central hub should be the biggest. The point is that the player characters are going to take their loot and knowledge and return here again and again and again over the course of the campaign. Now, in each of these regions, you're probably going to want to make a random encounter table or find one online. Specifically, you want the hexes closest to the central hub to be the lowest level and get progressively harder as you go out further. This is going to create a kind of soft wall as the characters get more powerful. Remember, random encounters don't have to be combat, just something unique and weird that exemplifies the region that they're traveling. The next step can be one of the most fun or one of the most daunting, putting something unique in every single hex. Now, you don't have to do the entire map all at once, but you do want to get a good 3 layers outside of your central hub. That comes out to 36 hexes. These don't all have to be full adventures or dungeons, just simple landmarks, something unique about this area that's not just a plain open field or an unremarkable forest to walk through. I really like the first edition Pathfinder adventure Kingmaker, a great candidate for a West Marches campaign, for precisely this reason. Every hex in that adventure has a landmark, be that a boon, a curse, a quest hook, and frequently require a roll from a specialized character to uncover it. For example, one hex might have a ruined altar to a forgotten god. A skill check could reveal the prayer which, when spoken, allows the statue to cast Cure Disease once per day. That's all you need. Now the players can make note of that and make a point to stop by when they get mummy rot or whatever. The circumstances around these landmarks can change in the future as well. Maybe later on a cult forms around the statue, trying to harness its power for themselves, or the statue just stops working until you can find an appropriate cleric to give it a blessing again. Filling out these hexes is how you build out your world. What sorts of legends, lore, and lost treasures are around? How do they hint at further locations your players haven't been yet? Set the tone for your campaign and each region with these encounters. This is as good a spot as any to note. This kind of campaign will not have an overarching plot. You might have a series of linked adventures and maybe even a big finale to wrap everything up, but the point of this kind of game is that the story is emergent. It centers on the characters, their motivations, relationships, and the risks they take more than any sort of overarching villainous plan. The nature of the game dictates that not every character is going to be present for every scene, which can make big reveals and cutscenes end up falling flat. Build your drama from the mystery, risks, and exploration of the unknown, and be gratuitous with your clues. Your players have to share this information with each other, and in order to do that, it has to register as a clue. Subtle foreshadowing leads to clues being overlooked, which means information's not being shared, which means quests aren't being found. This might mean breaking the immersion a little bit at certain points. Look at games like Breath of the Wild, Darkest Dungeon, or other open world survival crafting games to kind of get an idea of what these sort of plots might look like. It's not about big dramatic cutscenes, but scraps of lore that you piece together. Because of this pieced together nature, treasure maps are a great way to get your character started in a West Marches game. Something that reveals the location of a hidden tomb not by cartography, but by interpreting a riddle, following a song, reading the stars is going to get your characters out and exploring. And because you've put something in every single hex, even if they don't actually find the hidden tomb they were looking for, they're going to come back with a story and information. Maybe even another quest hook. Once you have your initial hexes built out, you can add more as players express a desire to go somewhere, when you have the time, or when inspiration strikes. Ask yourself why this part of the world is unexplored or unexplored. Did something happen recently? Is this region particularly dangerous, or is most of the world like this, with just spots of civilization here and there? This style of game is also traditionally quite lethal. Part of it comes from the old school style of game mastering, where it was less about court intrigue and personal stakes and more about going out, getting loot, and getting it back home safely. It's about how well you can manage your resources, push yourself further to get more loot, and deciding when's the smart time to turn back. And sometimes that idea comes a little too late. The freeform sandbox nature of a West Marches campaign does mean that sometimes characters will wander into an area that's a little too powerful for them. Maybe they try to push their luck a little bit too far, or they just get unlucky. However, one of the strengths of this kind of game means that a TPK doesn't mean the end of the game. There's more adventurers back at the hub who might go out and try to rescue the companions who fell going to the Temple of Doom, or at least try to rescue their loot. New adventurers can join at any time when they see all the new riches for the taking. Death need not be the end. Misinformation is also an expected part of gameplay. This doesn't mean players should deliberately lie and keep information secret from each other, more that is going to happen because people misinterpret things. A player might misidentify a dire wolf as a werewolf and tell everyone to come to this region with their silver weapons ready. Maybe they roll low, making a map to the Cave of Wonders, and so another group following in their footsteps ends up getting terribly lost. As a game master, you should resist the urge to correct these mistakes, and instead see where it takes the game. In fact, you might want to organize a central information hub for your players. Creating a Discord server or a private subreddit for players to post about what they found is half the fun of the game. The more players and game masters you have, the more important this becomes. Oh, did I just say game masters? Plural? You might have noticed one of the biggest things that can become a problem in a West Marches campaign is the game master having to match everyone's schedule. This might be viable for some people, but other campaigns might choose to have multiple game masters running different sessions at different times. Multiple game masters can be very cool, sharing the work of building out the world together as well as the true stories of what actually happened during each of these sessions, not just the rumors the characters are sharing between each other. However, this does require an extra level of coordination, and it might not work for every group. This is part of why people were so surprised to see Campaign 4 is going to be Western Marches style. Although I'm sure their scheduling issues are a little bit different than ours, this is a lot of work to put on America's hardest working dungeon master. While more story-driven games can benefit from an invisible hand sometimes, fudging rolls slightly or highlighting specific clues, part of the draw of this style is that there is no safety net. The Game Master should let the player's choices be true to the reality of the world, which can be hard to do for some Game Masters. We all like to see our players succeed, even if sometimes we pretend we don't. Where the line between an honest world and where the game stops being fun to play or run is going to be different for each table, but it is still a line you should be aware of as you play. Moving on to more specific issues, unusual travel through magic or technology can be a tricky issue in West Marches campaigns. Spells like teleport, windwalk, or access to vehicles like an airship can render travel trivial. Whether this works for your style of game or if you want to ban these spells and abilities is going to be up to you and your table. Exploration is key to the West Marches experience, and allowing players to bypass that can take some of the fun out of it. The in-game calendar can also get pretty messy if you try to be too close to it. One group might spend a month in-game on a single session, while another might have 3 sessions that only take place of 1 week of game time. You might be better served by using a loose downtime phase, representing weeks or months in between each of the adventures a character goes out on. This is where they might craft or learn new abilities. You could also do something similar to Pendragon, an Arthurian RPG, where characters only go on 1 quest a year during the summer. During the winter, characters stay in, try to get married, have a family, do their interpersonal tasks, as well as the actual work of leveling up for the next year. Depending on the system you choose, it could also be too easy for characters to recover fully while out in the wilderness. We want our players to have to return to the central hub to share information, and by making it the only place where they can fully recover is an easy way to do that. For games like D&D 5th edition, try taking a look at the gritty realism rules in the Dungeon Master's Guide, which makes long rests take a full week of downtime. This also helps prevent the 15-minute adventuring day, which is what happens when players use all of their abilities on the first combat and then go and take a long rest to get them all recovered. Another system-dependent hurdle is the difference of power level between players. In a game like D&D, trying to have a level 2 character tag along with a level 10 character creates an absolute nightmare for encounter balance. To solve this, you might have a low level limit for the game as a whole. Only allow characters to party up with people within a couple levels of their own, or, as Lynn Artime on Reddit suggests, a rising level range. This might look like all characters being levels 1 to 5. Then at a certain point, all the characters are level 3 to 7, bumping up anyone who is below level 3 to that point. You can also encourage players to have a handful of characters, although try to keep this from getting too far out of hand. Otherwise, you might have to track the entire lineage of Dwarfy McDwarferson and his 13 brothers. Intra-party conflict can also be a recurring problem. Disagreements about loot distribution, the morality of a given mission, or misinformation can lead to conflicts and accusations. Part of your job as a game master is to mediate these, and looking ahead to potential sources of conflicts is one of the best ways to prevent them. A good way to navigate these might be a charter, applicable both in-game and out, solving a lot of these problems of loot distribution and morality before anyone's emotions get involved. It is also key to maintain player and character separation while negotiating these conflicts. Tony, the player, is responsible for how he plays Dwarfy McDwarferson, but he's not responsible for Dwarfy McDwarferson having bad information because of a bad roll. Other characters might beef with Dwarfy, but it's important to remind the players of that divide. Adding on to managing player dynamics, Matt Colville suggests in his West Marches video an anti-click rule. This means characters can't party up with the same characters more than, say, twice in a row. The idea here is to promote a greater sense of community and not the same 4 or 5 characters playing together every time. Depending on the size of your group of players, this may or may not be a problem at all. If your campaign only has 8 players, this probably isn't necessary. It would actually inhibit more gameplay than anything else. And there's also game masters who've run for 30 plus players and never had an issue. The goal here is to make sure that everyone who wants to play gets to play, and sometimes that means taking turns. Now, I mentioned some ideas for variants of this, and I aim to deliver. Game masters with a small group who still want to experiment with this kind of play should look into something called troop-style play. What this means is each player has multiple characters, although they can only take one on a given adventure. See Dwarfy McDwarferson and his 13 brothers. This gives a similar sense of being part of the same large group, and is also fantastic for players who always want to try a new character build every week. Many Forged in the Dark games make this an easily available option, but I specifically want to call out Band of Blades. In Band of Blades, players rotate between many characters and choose to send a given squad out on a mission. One player might have created the medic character in that squad, but on the next mission, someone else might be playing that very same character. The only truly consistent characters for a player are the leaders, although everyone develops their favorites. A structure like this might be appealing for a certain kind of West Marches game. Depending on the nature of the system and what you want out of it, putting resources in various hexes where players can use these to upgrade their central hub is a very enticing part of gameplay. Again, Pathfinder's Kingmaker adventure does a fantastic job of this. The premise of the adventure is the players are granted barony over newly conquered lands and have to build up their central fort into a bustling city. Downtime is spent building and upgrading structures, maintaining the morale of the citizenry, keeping the taxes flowing in, and characters use their own abilities as the lead diplomat, spy master, or head general. If using something like those gritty realism rules doesn't work for the system or for your group, you might take a page from 13th Age. One of the rules of the game is that when the party takes a heal up, that is a full recovery, in the middle of an adventure, they also take a campaign loss. Now, this doesn't mean the campaign's entirely over, but it does mean there is a negative effect. If the adventure was to stop a cult from completing a magic ritual, well then taking that heal up means that the cult succeeds. This could also mean giving the party a devil's bargain. For example, they could camp out in the haunted woods, but the evil miasma that permeates the area is going to infect them, giving them a -2 on all rolls until they can rest back in town. You could also use a ticking clock or countdown that ticks up towards some terrible event, counting up whenever the players take a certain action or just as time passes. Everyone knows the last moon of autumn is coming, but can they make it to the Lonely Mountain in time to have it reveal the hidden doorway? Do they even know what hex it's in? A mega dungeon could also be a fantastic setting for a West Marches campaign. Delicious and Dungeon setting could be interpreted as this, with the central hub being just outside or on the surface of the mega dungeon, and adventurers going deeper and deeper to get better and better loot. Undermountain in the Forgotten Realms has a whole bunch of maps and lore already built in, ready to use for exactly this kind of thing. Oh yeah, you remember that module, Dungeon of the Mad Mage, goes all the way up to level 20? That covers maybe a sixth of the entire thing. And of course, you can always resort to my favorite mega dungeon map, any Mega Mall. They even come with a central hub baked in. Now, if we want to stretch the definition of variant, I'd argue you could run a West Marches campaign entirely in a single city. I don't think it'd be a huge stretch to run Blades in the Dark this way, in fact. In this idea, you still have your central hub, but it's much smaller. It might be a tavern or a secret hideout. There's less of a focus on exploration and more on urban intrigue, making alliances with factions and powerful NPCs. Act 3 of Baldur's Gate 3 is a prime example of what this could look like, exploring the city and also going deeper underneath it to hidden temples and dungeons. With all that said, who knows what Critical Role's campaign is going to look like? How is Brennan going to structure these adventures so everyone returns back to a central hub? Or will it actually be more of a parallel campaign with 3 different parties, stories interweaving, with less of a focus on exploration? Is capitalism even still the bad guy? Well, that's just about all the time we have. If you have any questions, comments, or things you'd like us to talk about, you can leave them in the comments below. Shoot us an email at biscuitwolfgames@gmail.com, or you can find us on Blue Sky at Biscuit Wolf Games. You can also find our own supplements and games at our itch.io and on DriveThruRPG under the Biscuit Wolf banner. We'll see you next time.